the late 80s, New York City was very tense.
New York City in the 1980s was boiling with racial tension.
It was a place where people were fearful. Fearful of crime, fearful of being mugged, of being attacked.
I would ride to work on the subway, and you would often see graffiti inside the subway and on the outside.
And Times Square, you still had all the live sex shows and hookers everywhere, and it seemed like ambulances and sirens were always racing.
Thousands of rapes, and people were afraid.
It was a very violent time in the city.
And there were definitely neighborhoods in New York City where you just didn't want to be, especially after dark.
New York in the 1980s, I think you could maybe best understand that as the New York between Scorsese's Taxi Driver.
All the animals come out at night. Someday a real rain will come and wash all this scum off the streets.
And Spike Lee's Do the Right Thing. It was like an ambient sense of danger in New York City at that point in time.
The city was chaotic. It was unpredictable, it was hostile.
This new drug emerged in the 1980s, which is crack.
This has reached epidemic proportions.
The crack epidemic had hit New York like a snowstorm.
Crack was like the Ebola of drugs. It just ravaged the place. It took the homicide rate through the ceiling.
88, 89, you had about 1,900 to 2,000 murders a year, citywide.
Basically, you've got almost as many murders in a month back then as you have now in an entire year in New York City. People are walking through the streets of New York in fear and concerned that the police cannot protect them.
At the same time that all of these things are happening, you have the emergence and really dominance of Wall Street culture. The kind of stock market, the trader, the financial industry, financial services industry, like all these things are emerging.
Bobby, 9 guys, that's the best offering. Those sectors were providing jobs that the highly educated were getting. And so we had this influx of people to the city. Now it was about making money and making as much money as possible. And during that time period, the movie Wall Street came out. Greed was good.
Greed, for lack of a better word, is good.
That was the thing, you know, the famous line in that movie.
The rich are doing really, really well in New York City.
But there were whole other areas in the city that it had just escaped, racially marginalized areas.
This is what's happening to us, and this is what's happening in our communities.
We don't go marching down in their neighborhood. Why they gotta come to our neighborhood?
There really was a lot of tension, racially speaking, a lot of mistrust and a lot of apprehension.
Well, in 1989, you must remember that the city was in a real divisive, polarized condition.
Another deadly bias incident has clouded the atmosphere of New York City.
It happened last night in the Bensonhurst section of Brooklyn.
A lot of the racial conflict that was taking place then involved attacks by whites on blacks.
The man ran for his life. He was killed and trying to flee from what he thought was going to be physical harm. That's all. And it was because he was black.
A mob of white young people predominantly chased 3 blacks whose car had broken down. They came upon them, they chased them. One of those people, a man named Michael Griffith, ended up chased into traffic. He was hit by a car and he died.
It threw more coal on the fire of the racial unrest in the city.
If you factor all that in, cocaine being increasingly prominent, division between black and white. You come to a picture of great fearfulness in New York. It was a supercharged time.
There's turmoil, and there's greed, and there's wealth, and there's poverty, and there's crime, and there's fear and violence, and it is all wrapped up in one big, tumultuous, single city between the East and Hudson rivers.